All right, everyone, let's give it up for Jason Huntsman.
Self-applause. No, thanks, Charles, for inviting me. I'm just going to walk through my career, which has honestly been a little bit misguided at times. So I'm hopefully going to share some things on how a career, sometimes people feel like you have to have your career completely locked in. You don't. There's lots of different directions you can take a career. So I'm going to kind of walk through sort of what happened to me, and hopefully that resonates with some of you. So that's my family. My wife, Virginia, is there. She's a neonatal ICU nurse at Primary Children's Hospital. My son, Nicholas, is graduating this year from high school, thinking about going into the military. And then my daughter, Lydia, is 11. So that's my family. I don't think anyone will know who this is, but I just thought maybe. Does anyone know who this is? I think the chances are pretty much zero. His name is Dixie Levitt. And if you know Mike Levitt, previous Utah governor, this is his dad. He was an entrepreneur down in southern Utah. He was actually a school teacher. And then he needed to make more money in the summer. He started selling insurance. And the insurance agency that he was working for said, hey, why are you going to go back to teaching? Why don't you come sell insurance? You're pretty good at it. If you meet a certain threshold, you might as well stay in. So he did. And the reason I share that is because, at one time, I'm the first person to go to college in my family. Maybe some of you are the same. No one in my family ever went to college before me. But after I turned 6 and went into first grade, my mom said, hey, I'm going to get a job. I'm not going to be a stay-at-home mom anymore. And so she interviewed and got a position as, an executive assistant, basically, secretary at Dixie Levitt Agency. And then she retired almost 30 years later as the VP of Information Systems for them with no college degree, which probably is pretty rare. And at one time, she worked for the Dixie Levitt Agency. My dad was an agency manager selling insurance at Dixie Levitt Agency. And my first business I started was lawn care. And my client was Dixie Levitt and all of his real estate he owned. It was about 60-something lawns, which I got to start out on. So at one time, my whole family was sort of supported by this entrepreneur who had started a business. And so that's kind of important to me because your careers are probably going to impact way more people than just yourself. And in my case, this guy's business, that it was pretty small in the 80s, but now it's probably one of the biggest insurance brokerages in the US, all started by one guy. So I was probably the most undecided person for a major in history. I did not want to commit to anything. I've never been to college, so I didn't really know what it was really all about. I researched a bunch of careers, had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I thought, well, I'll either do an MBA, lawyer, or a doctor. And no one cares what your undergrad is in those three cases. So I went and found the shortest degree I could find, which was sociology. And I said, okay, I'm going to go out in sociology. And it was just the shortest degree, and I wanted to, get to that next step. And I was going to go year round. I wasn't going to take any time off. I was just going to get done as fast as possible. Then I met my wife, and she said, well, my dad's a mechanical engineer. What are you studying? I'm like, oh, mechanical engineering. And that's really shallow, but I changed my major to that, that day, and ended up being a mechanical engineer, or at least studying that. I knew I never wanted to really be a mechanical engineer full time, but I thought, MBAs like engineers, medicals, schools like engineers, and I could be a patent attorney if I really like going into law. So I thought it was a win-win. Ended up going into engineering. My first job out of school was working on the rocket boosters for a lot of the NASA programs. So I could say I was a rocket scientist. I liked working, but I knew it wasn't the job for me long term. I just needed to go work anywhere for 2 years in order to go back and go to MBA school. I ended up looking at a law degree. I job shadowed a patent attorney for about 3 days. And it was the most bored I've ever been in my life. And I thought, okay, this isn't the career for me. And so I kind of took that one off. Went to anatomy class, talked to a few doctors, realized I don't like looking at bodies and touching bodies and figuring out how to help bodies. So that was out of the question too. So I ended up saying, okay, I'm going to go do an MBA. And got my engineering degree, went and worked at on solid rockets for a while. Really didn't like it because the product development life cycle on a rocket is like 20 years. So it's like you work on one your 1 or 2 your whole career. And I just didn't really enjoy it. It was a great place to work, great people, but it just wasn't for me. So I went back and got an MBA and thought, okay, this is the track I'm going to take, is an MBA. I got an MBA school, and this is the first time I ever heard the word venture capital. I'd heard the word entrepreneurship before. I kind of knew what that was about, but then I kind of learned about this new thing called venture capital, where you go ask people for money, and they help you start a company. And again, I was pretty naive. I'd never really witnessed that before. So in my MBA program, just like undergrad, they want you to pick a track. You got to pick finance or HR or marketing. And at the time, they didn't have an entrepreneurship track. And I just went to the MBA program director and I said, I'm not picking a track. And he said, okay, you're making a big mistake. You should pick a track, because that's how you get a job. And I said, no, I'll do all the cores, and then I'm going to take the classes that I really either are very interested in or classes that I don't know about that I want to learn about. So I did that. So I did kind of my own entrepreneurship interest in an MBA program. Most MBA programs have entrepreneurship emphasis now, but they didn't back then. And they had this thing, and I went to BYU for my MBA program. They had this thing called the BYU Business Plan Competition, and I won it that year. And so coming out of MBA school, it was a Great Recession. That year is probably the worst time to get a job in, I don't know, since the Great Depression. And I had done an internship with Ford Motor Company in their strategy department, which I really loved. And I had a job offer, and then about 3 or 4 months before graduation, the job offer was rescinded because of the recession. And it happened to a lot of students that year. It was probably the worst year to graduate with an MBA. You go and get an MBA so you can kind of lift your salary up and get a better career. But it was really tough. And so, me and a couple other people were like, you know what? We're just going to do it ourselves. If, these big corporate jobs aren't available, we'll just create an income ourselves. So I had studied a lot about venture capital. And so we raised some money. We started a company. And honestly, we spent all the money. And I can honestly say I wish I was better prepared then, but you're never really prepared. So you can jump into anything. And we created a company called Zero Max Sciences, which was later sold to PTI, actually pretty quickly sold to PTI. And the experience through kind of going through that process of raising money, starting out operations, getting a product kind of to market and then selling the company, I learned a lot through that process. And I really enjoyed the part where we were raising money. That part was more kind of interesting to me. And so given that I didn't know really what to do after we sold the company, and I took a temporary job. So this is another thing about a career. Sometimes you get an opportunity to do something that's maybe a little bit crazy that you probably shouldn't do, but maybe you ought to try it. So I was given an opportunity to work for the Department of Defense, taking military technology out of their labs and going and starting companies with some venture capital partners. The only catch of this job was I had to go live in Alaska, because that was where the senator had the funds appropriated to. And so I would literally get up on Monday, fly from Alaska, usually to the East Coast, and then fly back at the end of the week. But it was really cool to live in Alaska. And at the time, my wife and I, we went hiking every weekend. It was a beautiful place, really loved it there, loved the people. But I learned a lot about how to take technology, which we had done before, take technology out of a military lab or any other business. It could be a corporate business, and try to create a company around it, because that's very difficult, because usually the technology isn't mature enough. Everyone's way overexcited about how much money it can make, and everyone underestimates the effort that it takes to actually create a product with it. And so I did that for about 6 months. Like I said, it was a temporary position they had funding for. I thought, oh, this will be cool. So I went and did it. I met a lot of people through doing that. If I wouldn't have done that, and I probably would have went a more kind of traditional route, I don't think I would have had as many connections to come back to later on in life. And so I guess I would say that if you're thinking about starting a business, or you're thinking about joining a startup or something, take those smaller opportunities that may be temporary, because you'll usually meet people and learn a lot through doing it. From there, Ford called me. They're like, hey, we gave you an offer out of MBA school, then we took it back. That was kind of rude of us, but we kind of see what you're doing. We're really looking to get into electric vehicles, and we kind of have a defunct venture capital arm that's going to do that. And so there's a strategy leadership program that you could join as an MBA grad. I was already out of MBA school a while, but I came back. I said, okay, great, we'll go to Ford, and we'll do that. And so I was part of Ford's effort to launch the very first electric vehicle, which was a van, which wasn't very exciting. But we sold a lot of them to like Verizon and different things as a van. And the one thing I will say from a career perspective on this is, if you go into a corporation, there's usually a lot of really safe jobs that you can choose. And usually when you choose those safe routes, you have to work a long time to kind of work your way up. If you go and do something a little more off the beaten path, even inside of a corporation, you usually get more opportunities, you get more responsibility, and you usually get a lot more interactions with leadership. And so at the time, not a lot of people wanted to go work in electric vehicle careers, because they thought it as risky. Like, oh, I'll go work in electric vehicles, it's not going to take off, and I'll be risking my career. Well, I did the exact opposite. I just dove all the way in. I got a lot more opportunity, a lot more experience and responsibility, because the teams just weren't as big as they were. Like, I had a friend who his dream was to be the F-150 and truck vehicle line manager. That's going to take him 30 years to get there. Whereas I could hop over here, take a lot more risk, and do something that maybe they're not going to be doing in 10 years, but I got a lot more experience by doing that. From there, again, this is all networking. Go to as many conferences as you can, speak at them. Even as a young person, there's lots of opportunity to speak at conferences and do things. And then Harley Davidson called me and said, hey, we want to do some electric vehicle stuff. What do you think about jumping ship from Ford and coming over to Harley Davidson? And so, again, I'd started off as an entrepreneur, kind of got more into investing, and then kind of found my niche in being able to take technology, make a product or a business out of it. So at Harley Davidson, took a couple twists and turns there. I was there for almost a decade, and from all in corporate strategy. So I was really focused on creating new vehicles or new businesses. It could be anything from Harley Davidson restaurants to new electric vehicles to new clothing lines, whatever we thought could grow the business. And there was a lot of projects that we did. A lot of them never see the light of day, especially if you're working in very high-level corporate strategy. You might pick 8 things that a corporation is going to do, and then maybe they do 2 of them, and you're kind of a part of launching that. And so one of the other things that I got tasked to do at Harley as a kind of a career, I don't know what to call it. So there was at one point at Harley Davidson where I kind of built my name on being able to do kind of really hard, messy things. And one thing they wanted to do was build a data science department and be able to predict when people were buying and selling their motorcycles. And we had a huge database of people, over 10 million. How are we going to monetize that? And so I got tasked with kind of building one of the first data science teams as part of consumer analytics. And so I got really deep into analytics. I'm not a data scientist. I don't have a PhD. Most of the people I hired had a PhD. They were very good at, the early stages of AI, because this was, 10 years ago. And I guess my advice there is sometimes in your career, you're given opportunities to do some things you know nothing about, and you may not even want to do it. When I went into that, I kind of didn't want to, but it was a good opportunity. When someone in leadership says, "Hey, I think this would be a good opportunity for you," even if it might not be like your dream career, go try this. And so we got to build up a team, a lot of strategic partnerships and projects around data analytics. And I learned a lot there around data analytics, even though I wasn't the one executing it. I was just kind of managing the team and people. And from there, I kind of backed back out to strategy, and we looked at electric vehicles again and which ones we were going to do. And we created these 3 electric vehicles. Were all publicly revealed. The one on the left is a kind of a scooterish thing. That never made it to market, at least it hasn't yet. The one on the right was kind of a electric motorized mountain bike. Didn't make it to market for various reasons. And the one in the middle is the Livewire Harley Davidson motorcycle, which not only made it to market, but now is its own company. Because Livewire was SPAC'd, a special purpose acquisition vehicle. And it was SPAC'd 2 or 3 years ago. And now it's its own company, and they sell electric motorcycles. It's Livewire, but it's heavily influenced by Harley Davidson. Now, what did I do? There was also a project about electric bicycles. And you think Harley Davidson electric bicycles, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but it kind of did. We did a lot of research. The market was large. And there was just an opportunity to use that brand name or an association with the brand in the electric bicycle space. And so just like in a lot of careers, we were scheduled to launch that, and we got a new CEO. And the CEO came and said, "Hey, I think we need to cull down our portfolio to, just motorcycles. We really like this e-bike space, but, it's not something that they see kind of in the future at Harley Davidson. What can we do with it?" So I said, I know a lot of people. I've done a lot of venture capital investing. Let's go get some funding from venture capital. At the time, I was living in Milwaukee, where Harley Davidson is headquartered. And I said, look, I have a huge network of investors out in Utah, some on the East Coast and in DC area from working in kind of the Department of Defense. Let me go network those folks and see if anybody's interested in putting some money in this, and we'll spin it out to its own company. Harley Davidson can be a minority investor or a majority, whatever. And we ended up spinning it out to be Serial One Cycle Company. And just to kind of give you some perspective on this, only 7 people spun the company out with me. One, I had to convince them, like, hey, leave your corporate jobs and come and let's start this new bicycle company. I've done a couple of startups before. I've sold a company before. This is going to be great. And so I did convince 7 people to do it with me. And once all the documents were signed to do it, we realized, hey, we have to launch a brand. And so, we had 2 people on our marketing team. They ran over to the Harley Davidson Museum. And then from, I think, midnight till 4 in the morning, we created this ad and launched this ad a couple of days later. So here's how we launched the new company.
When Harley Davidson first put power to 2 wheels in 1903, it changed how the world moved. Forever. More than a century later, inspired by the pioneering spirit of Harley Davidson's founders, Serial One has created an e-bike that's designed to change how the world moves. again.
So that was created in one night, one really late night. And we launched the brand, and that kind of broke the internet. We had like millions and millions of people coming. We had a really terrible website set up to kind of try to capture as many people as we can. And we had a launch date already on with a counter. Now, I'll be honest, the bike that's in that video is completely fake. We hadn't produced a single bike yet. I had set up the supply chain mostly in Taiwan and Europe, but we hadn't made a bike yet, not let alone sold anything. And even the lights and everything was completely faked. And we did it knowing, put a lot of pressure on ourselves, knowing that we had to get a bike out as soon as possible. And one of the guys on our team, he actually went to Taiwan during COVID, because this was right as COVID was starting, which was insane. And he lived in Taiwan for 3 months to make sure we could get our bikes launched. And because it wasn't normal business. Normally, I would travel over to Taiwan at least once a month for a week, and even in Europe. But during COVID, we couldn't do that. And so one guy kind of had to make the sacrifice and go over there because we couldn't go back and forth. He was quarantined in a government hotel for 2 weeks. It was pretty bad. And then he worked to get the bikes launched. And then we launched all of the bikes in in March of that year. So this video went off in November, and the bikes went on sale in March. And that was the launch of Serial One Cycle Company, powered by Harley Davidson. So have I been an entrepreneur? Yes, but I've always tried to latch onto things that have partnerships or something already made or involved. The first company I launched, even going back to the lawn mowing business, I didn't start out with 1 or 2 lawns. I had a partner in Dixie Levitt that gave me 60-something lawns to mow, right? When we launched Zero Max Sciences, we launched it from a university technology that had already been done, okay? And so I'm a big believer in that. It's very, very difficult to launch a company from scratch. And if you want to be an entrepreneur, my advice would either be to start something really small, even something like a vending machine business. Really simple, really small. You learn how to control a P&L, or go join a really small startup. I usually don't recommend people to do what I did and try to form a company right out of college, because I just don't feel like I had enough experience to do that. And a lot of people do it, and we see all the successes, but we don't see the 95% of people who don't make it. So my 2 pieces of advice if you're going to be an entrepreneur: go join a startup. If you haven't done a lot of entrepreneurship before, go join a young startup. You'll be more busy than you'll believe. Or go buy something that's already there, something small, and try to build it up. From a supply chain perspective, because this is supposed to be a supply chain kind of initiative, so most of my career has been in strategy and building kind of 0 to 1, and then sort of turning it over to other people inside of a corporation. And Serial One was the one where I truly started from nothing, flew over and met suppliers. I'll say when you're a big company, every supplier wants to work with you. When you're a small company, no one does. And so, they're usually begging you to get the contract when you're a big company. When you're an entrepreneur and you're small, you're begging them to make your stuff, and it's hard. A lot of travel. I traveled, 30-something different countries because either our customers and dealers were there, or part of the supply chain was there. And managing the supply chain takes a lot of grit. People who manage supply chains are very confident. There's so much negotiation that goes involved in relationship management. Honestly, it's a very difficult job to be really good at. And thankfully, I had some people on my team that were very good at it, and then I could kind of lead in as well. But from a supply chain perspective, I owned everything at Serial One, from the design, marketing, as the CEO, and I had to learn a lot of new things. I'd never been truly in marketing before 100%, never been in supply chain 100%, never been in finance 100%. But I kind of rubbed shoulders with all those people throughout my career, and I had to call a lot of people. So don't be afraid to just call people, because that's where you're just going to learn the most. Where are we at on time? Okay. So I'll do this one. This is one more ad. Again, as an entrepreneur, you have to produce Super Bowl ads with almost no money and with almost no time. And so usually, in order to get the production people there, you can only afford a certain window, and you're trying to produce the best video you can or best marketing that you can with little funds. So here's another video that we did once the products were launching on just one of the models, which was the Mosh.
I'm going to go through the notes for today's meeting. I think the most important thing to remember is that when you do file the end of your sales reports, there's very specific instructions that you can follow.
So that's what being an entrepreneur is most of the time. You make a lot of mistakes. I can say specifically from the CEO perspective, and one thing that I learned through doing this over the past, it's about 5 years. The CEO is a very lonely job. It's probably the most lonely I've been in a work environment ever, even though, our team was, 50 people throughout the whole world. It's lonely because you report to a board, those shareholders have expectations. We raised money from investors. Harley Davidson was on the board as well. And, you're trying to grow this, hyper fast company. And we grew it very, very fast. And everyone gets really excited. And then trying to keep control of all the processes when you're doing that is really difficult. And when you're a CEO, it's all about making really big moves. Which is why I would recommend doing a small business first. Even me doing my lawn care business helped, because you just get used to doing just regular things in business. Whereas if you own a vending machine company, you're making moves, but you're not making these massive moves that if you're wrong, the company's probably going to die. And it's a lot of pressure. Most of the issues I dealt with as a CEO were people issues. And, it's hard. I'll just share a couple experiences. One experience I had to fire one of my best friends. He was leading a portion of the company. Wasn't going as well as we wanted it to. Even if I wanted to give kind of a little more time, the board was like, nope, we got to move on. and that wasn't fun. We're still friends after a little while, but it's really tough. And then about a year ago, the board decided they wanted to sell the company. And so I went through the process of, again, calling people, reaching out, trying to find a buyer. And then in July of last year, we sold the company to a new owner. And I stayed on as the interim CEO till the end of the year. And now I'm no longer affiliated. So that's the thing as an entrepreneur too. There's exits. And even though it's my baby and I built it up, someone else owns it now. And even as the interim CEO, I was kind of a lame duck CEO. I couldn't do much. And they made certain moves that they wanted to make. And, it's kind of interesting to see that happen. You make a lot of mistakes as an entrepreneur, even on supply chain. You might get a supplier that maybe they don't perform the best, so you have to move suppliers really fast. That's really challenging. A lot of the marketing, we launched new products. We did a partnership with NASCAR where we had some NASCARs rolling around. And, I'll be honest, I don't know if it was the best use of funds, but that's what we did. We tried things, and sometimes it worked and a lot of times it didn't. So I guess that's kind of my message in all this. Right now, I'm a managing partner at Canyon 14. So what I do now is I look at businesses to buy if they're small and try to grow them like I've grown other businesses in the past. So I'm working with 3 businesses right now to do that. And I guess I can say from a career perspective, again, don't be afraid to take some risk. The network that you make during those times, you'll always come back to. And I always tell people, I don't like to use the word mentor because I think it connotates sort of this hierarchical relationship. But just find 3 people that you trust. Find someone your age that you trust from a career perspective. So I've got a guy that we went to school together, and I call him all the time on career advice. He's in a completely different career, but I trust him because he's nice enough to tell me if I'm going to do something stupid. Another person is find someone who's got the career you want or you think you want, and that might change over time. And the third is to find someone who's just really successful, who doesn't have anything to do with what you want to do. And, there's one person I've called her, multiple times, just for advice. And a lot of the times that's how you find your jobs anyway. I can't tell you how many people have given me a resume. And even if it's just a kind of a shallow relationship, I'll still pass their resume on, and that they end up getting, at least they get an interview, right? If it's a real deeper relationship and I know them well, then then it's like, you need to hire this person. And so, it's all about kind of, again, taking risks, building relationships with people, and then seeing where it goes from there. That's all I had.
All right, questions for Jason.
What are the 3 companies that you're working on right now?
So there's non-disclosure agreements involved, but I'll just kind of speak generally. So one is a company who, I'm really passionate about barbecue. And one is a company that's invented kind of a new barbecue device. And so right now we're in the middle of raising some funding to acquire that company and go in. Another one is looking at is actually a firearms company. Very, very, very small. They only make one firearm. And again, that's kind of a market that I haven't been in before, but definitely looking at it. And then another one's more of a retail play. And those are kind of the 3 companies I'm involved with right now. The first 2 I'm involved with more than the third because it's kind of a process.
What would you say, is the 3 most important things to build that company quickly? Right when you get in, you buy a new company, what are the first 3 things that you're like, okay, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, and this needs to happen?
I honestly think it depends on which company you buy. So the profile that I was looking for is a very, very good product that's been proven. Maybe the company is at least 5 years old. And maybe they sell on Amazon extremely well and D2C, but they're not in any retail locations. So for example, like the barbecue company, I could probably triple their revenue with 3 phone calls because I've sold things through Best Buy, I have relationships at Costco. I know I can do that. So it's not so much what I bring to the table, but it's more of I have to find a company that's small enough where there's a lot of upside. But I'm not the inventor. I've never been. I wish I was a good inventor, but I'm not. So I tend to look for companies that have a great product. It's been proven over time. They just need help with marketing, distribution, and probably supply chain.
I know you mentioned that one of the good ways to start is finding those small startup companies, but how do you find those small startup companies?
Like if I was a student, if I was a student, honestly, like really boring businesses are probably the best way to go. If I was a student, lawn care, vending machines. What's another one?
I did mobile detailing for 5 years while I was a college student.
Mobile detailing. Storage sheds. Now, sometimes you don't have the capacity to go buy a big chunk of land, right? But there's things you can get involved in to, again, you want to be able to manage P&L and manage the business when it's not as big as something like Serial One was. Serial One got big really fast, and it's really difficult if you haven't done some of that stuff before. So that's what I would say. You can go on to Biz Buy Sell. There's millions of businesses for sale all the time, and there's some really interesting ones out there that are fairly inexpensive that you can usually buy with no money, because a lot of those will seller finance, which means, hey, okay, the business is $50,000. Seller finance this over 5 years, and I'll buy it for 50. And you're paying them every month, but you just bought the business for no money down. It's a little bit risky, but you have to know what you're doing. It's got to be something you know about.
What kind of safety net do you keep yourself in financially in order to afford to take risks like this?
That's a good question. So I couldn't do this in college because obviously I was, you don't have any money in college. I didn't at least. One, I graduated with 0 debt both times. That was really important to me. And I worked a lot of crappy jobs to make sure I could do that. Even when I was doing entrepreneurship, I tried to always have something else. A lot of hard work, that's one. Number 2 is, for me, I always advise someone if they're going to jump out of corporate or jump to start a business. I know this sounds daunting probably from your perspective, but have a year worth of savings. And so after I was done with Serial One, I don't need to get a job for a year if I didn't want to. And that takes the pressure off. Because if you don't do that, you're going to end up not, it's a lot of pressure, especially when you have a family.
And a follow-up question with that. So staying out of any consumer debt, pretty much?
The only debt I've ever had in my life is my house. I don't know. That's just how I did it. Even cars. I just always, saved enough money to buy one or bought a used one. It's kind of funny. I worked at Ford and Harley. And so they had programs. I owned probably 10 different Harley Davidson motorcycles. And they had programs where you could own a nice car. But that really impacted me. I will never buy a new car just because I know how much they cost. I know I just won't. I'll buy a new car for my wife, but not for me.
How many people are involved in Camping Bolt 2?
Right now it's just 3 of us. Yeah. We'll probably keep it that way too. Keep it pretty small.
So I'm working with this barbecue sauce business, and there's a problem with supply. What do I do to get so that we can make the sauce and grow? I don't know if that makes sense.
So you can't get the ingredients that you need?
We can get the ingredients, but I just don't know where to find a supplier, somebody that like can help us.
Okay.
with that.
So I do it's like a mini course on product development, but one part of it is how to find suppliers. And I usually do it with physical products. So I'm not in the space of food, but there are other people that are, and there usually are trade shows. There's usually one or two massive ones in the US. They're usually in Vegas or Chicago. So in physical products, in China, there's the Canton Festival is twice a year. Every supplier comes to that, and it's massive. And then they also do it twice in the US, once in Vegas and once in Chicago usually. You can usually find, if you find a trade show that kind of focuses on sauces and things, you can probably find 20 suppliers there. And then you just talk to them, and they want to sell. Now, if you're a small company, you have to convince them. And that's kind of that's how I usually find them, is go to the trade shows. It doesn't usually work to find them online and email them. It sometimes works, but usually you have to talk to them. Any other questions? Probably overtime, aren't we?
That's great. Do one more. So, you talked about a lot of different skills and opportunities you had. Are there like resources that you go to check something out before you like dive into it? Like for example, like production line information or kind of the science.
Yeah. So it's really hard to set up a production line. And so all the businesses that I've been involved with, except for Harley and Ford, who obviously make their own things. Cereal went out of contract manufacturer. This barbecue company has a contract manufacturer. Usually the supplier is the manufacturer for most products. And because it's really, really, really difficult to set up a manufacturing line. And to be honest, I've avoided that in my career whenever we're launching something new, because it's so capital intensive. You need so much money that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to do right at the beginning, unless you're like Elon Musk or something. And yeah, he's the exception.